This is Jeff Scott of Blackhawk Technical College. As promised, I'm going to be going over as many of the chapters from Professional ASP.NET MVC5 as possible between now and the end of the semester. I've gone through Chapter 1 already, and Chapter 2, which starts on page 31, is on controllers. And as you can see, the objectives for the chapter: understanding the controller's role, setting up a sample application, the MVC Music Store, and Controller 101. As far as that music store goes, and I wish I had gotten into the virtual desktop before we started, but I didn't, so not a problem. Now I'm having continuous problems here on the virtual desktop. Many of you know this. When I'm going into Android, that I'm running out of room on the desktop all the time. So I removed some stuff, unfortunately, that I had put here, so I'm going to have to go get it. But I just wanted to show you something here. If you hear any noise in the background, I'm printing out a bunch of stuff, so like I said, if you do hear that, apologize if that makes it harder for you to hear or understand. Alright, so among other things here, this is the MVC Music tutorial. According to this, it's in VB.NET, which I guess I really didn't realize, but that's okay. We can still look at the functionality of it. So this was built, this particular project was built with MVC3, and MVC5 is the current model view controller number. In fact, 6 is in beta right now. So the stuff that's in here, while it still works, etc., you've got to realize that it's a little bit old, and I wish they would update this. If they would update this, I probably wouldn't even buy a book next time. I'd probably just use this. But we'll see as time goes on. What I want to do is run this when it comes up and show it to you and let you get hopefully some kind of a flavor, so to speak, of what this particular thing is about. Let's let that spin for a while. And as it does, as it says, the chapter explains how controllers respond to user hypertext transfer protocol requests and then return information from the browsers. The controller is kind of the thing in the middle. It's the intermediary. Technically, the view and the model don't converse with one another directly. They only do indirectly through the controller. And as it says, this chapter lays the groundwork for the following chapters. Chapter 1 discussed the MVC pattern in general. And now, as it says, it's time to go in and talk about the controller. So the author says, well, maybe we should start with a definition. So there's the definition that the author gives here. Controllers within the MVC pattern are responsible for responding to user input, making changes to the model in response to user input. In this way, controllers in the MVC pattern are concerned with the flow of the application, working with the data coming in and providing data going out to the relevant view. Again, they're the conduit. They're kind of the intermediary, or the thing that's between the model and the view. Then they go back and they talk about the way things used to be. I'm just not going to do that. Alright, it says a good way to think about how MVC works in a web scenario is that MVC serves up the results of method calls, not dynamically generated web pages. So they give you a little history of this, and again, I don't really want to go through this, but what they say is back in the 70s and 80s, we came up with the idea of event-driven programming, executing program actions based on events fired by the user, such as mouse clicks. We still use that. That's the way I pretty much teach the C# class. But over time, as it says, GUIs became the norm, and it became clear that an MVC pattern wasn't appropriate for these new systems. So others came to be. Alright, ASP.NET Web Forms is an event-based system unique with respect to the platforms here. It says when a button is clicked, the button control responds and raises an event to the server indicating that it's been clicked. The beauty of this approach is it allows the developer to work at a higher level of abstraction when she or he is developing code. But it says under the hood there's a lot of stuff that's going on. Okay? So it says with the web, the state of the app for the user essentially vanishes and then is restored with each click. You've heard me say this again and again, the fact that HTTP is stateless. Alright? So the underlying idea here, as it says, is that the concept of state is lost in programming for the web, and many are not willing to embrace a virtually stateful platform. So it says, given this, there's been a resurgence in the MVC pattern, but with modifications. One example of a modification is that in traditional MVC, the model observes the view via an indirect association to the view. All right, with MVC for the web, by the time the view is sent to the browser, the model is generally no longer in memory and does not have the ability to observe events. With MVC for the web, the controller is once again at the forefront. So again, as I've already mentioned, applying this pattern requires that every user input to a web app simply take the form of a request. For example, with ASP.NET MVC, each request is routed using something we talk about later, as you can see, to a method on a controller, known as an action. You'll see that already in this chapter. The controller then is entirely responsible for interpreting the request, manipulating the model if or as necessary, selecting the view to send back to the user via the response. So it's in charge. All right. So they go over this sample application. Let's see if it's up yet. All right, we get these. Don't let that stuff worry you as far as getting any kind of messages or whatever. You see we get a lot of the same players. In other words, there's controllers, there's views, okay, for a lot of different things, and there are models. Okay, and if I run the program, this is what they show you in the book here. And again, I'm on page, I'm on page 34 in the book, and they show you on 34, 35, 36, 37, and 38 some of the basics of what this particular application is about. Again, written in MVC3, still relevant today. So the first thing they show you here is it says it's a simple music store that includes basic shopping, checkout, and administration. Ideally, it's going to come up fairly quickly. Again, you can go to http://mvcmusicstore.codeplex.com and you can get this and a tutorial, and that's pretty much what I've provided here. So what you see up on the screen right now is pretty much what you see in figure 2.1 that's on page 34 of the book. And it says the following store features are covered. Browse. All right? And it says browse through the store by genre and artist. And it looks like here that they're going into store, and there's the different genres. All right? So notice they've got jazz up. So what you should see is pretty much right here. What you see is the same kind of thing that you see in the book in figure 2.2 on page 35. All right? Then you'll notice as we work our way through here that there are ways that you can come in and you can add new things. All right? I can set up an account for myself. I can put things into an account. So I can go to the store. So I can come to classical. And I can go to the last night of the proms. Click on that and add it to my cart. Once I do that, you can see how my cart has been updated. All right, I can come in now if I want, remove it from the cart. Now there's nothing in there. I can go to the checkout. Doesn't really make much sense because I don't have anything to check out, but I can go add another thing. So I can go to rock, restless and wild, add to cart. All right, again, if I want to go to checkout, notice I have to register if I don't have an account. All right, so username J Scott, email address jscott@blackhawk.edu, password JScott, JSCOTT 1234 comma, JSCOTT 1234 comma, register. Sure, you can remember that password. It's spinning its wheels and thinking about what's going on here. But I showed you how to add something to a shopping cart and then basically how to bring up the cart, and that's what they're showing here. Now notice SQL exception wasn't handled by the code. All right, so there's something in here that it doesn't like. Like I said, I'm not saying it's perfect. But so it gets to a point and then it doesn't like it. So I guess we can't show you everything that's in here. Let's just jump back into our book and jump up all the way to page 38 under controller basics. All right. So what we're going to end up doing in just a minute is I can stop the run of that one that's going right here. So in other words, I can do a file, close solution. Do I want to stop debugging? Yes. Do I want to save anything? If it asks me, no. All right, I'm going to just come in here and do a file, new, project. I'm going to call it Jeff MVC Music Store. Make sure I'm saving it right to my desktop. All right, create the directory. Click OK. And I want it to be an MVC project and add my unit test, so I'm going to click OK. This is the one basically I built in the last chapter because it didn't do anything yet. So we're going to do a couple things to it in this chapter and in the following chapters. Alright, I think the last one I just called MVC Music Store, but just to make sure there was no problems, I know I don't have one called Jeff MVC Music Store, so that's what I created right here. Now they do mention on the bottom of page 38 in the book, it says getting started with MVC is sort of like a chicken and the egg problem. It says there are three parts, the model, the view, and the controller. You have to understand all three of them, but what do you start with? It says to get started, what we'll do in this chapter is we'll learn about controllers at a very high level, and for now we'll ignore the model and the view at least a bit. Alright, and then after we learn about how controllers work, we're ready to learn about how views work in chapter 3, how models work, I believe that's in chapter 4, and how other ASP.NET MVC development topics work later. Then we'll go back to advanced controller topics in chapter 15. Alright, so what I just gave you is the stuff that's shown here. Alright, so it says a simple example. Before writing any real code, let's look at what's included in the default project. Alright, so jumping back, let's take a look at the actual project. I think it might make it a little easier. It says that under controllers, we've got a home controller that's responsible for the home page as well as the about page and the contact page. We've got an account controller, which provides for things like logging out, account registration, etc. So they want us to open up the home controller right here. And what you see on your screen is the same thing that you see in figure 2.7 that's on the bottom of page, or in the middle of page 39. It says this is a pretty simple class that inherits from the controller. Alright, that's how we show inheritance right there. So inherits from the controller class. Alright. The index method, as it says, is responsible for deciding what happens when you browse to the home web page of a site. So what they want us to do, it says replace your application description. So replace this that you see right here, your application description page, with something else. I don't know why they chose this, but they chose I like cake. Alright. So turning up to page 40 in the book, I believe that's all that we're supposed to change. That's that view bag message. This still says your contact page underneath it. So I'm going to save. And I'm going to run the program. It says run the application by pressing the F5 key or debug start, which is what I did. Visual Studio compiles the app and launches it under IIS Express. Kind of an important thing on the bottom here of page 40 in the gray box. It says Visual Studio 2013 includes IIS Express, which is different from where we've been running things in the past. Under the old Visual Studio 2010 and 2012, we ran it using the Visual Studio developmental server that's went by the code name Cassini rather than IIS Express. IIS Express is kind of a stripped down or optimized version of regular IIS. Alright, and they give you a blog that you can read more with Scott Guthrie, who's kind of a guru on this stuff. So it says a browser window opens and the site appears. So what you see right here is the same thing that you see in figure 2.8 on the top of page 41. The author says navigate to the about page by browsing to the home about. Now I want to show two things here. Alright, so I want to come here, and as the author says, I want to go to the end here and I want to say home about. And you see I like cake. No biggie there. But what I wanted to show you is what we put in here is we physically put in the routing that we wanted to do. On our home screen, we wanted to go to the About page. Alright, now I'm going to try this and just put in About. You see, it can't find it. It needs to know based on when you get in that you're at the home page, and this isn't case sensitive, as you already saw, then the about page. Boom, I like cake. But if I go back to home again, the other thing is what we just did was we mocked clicking the about button. Kind of an important thing for you to realize that. So it says, great, you created a new project and you put some words on the screen. Now let's get back to building an actual application by creating a new view controller. So I'm up to page 42. Okay, so I'm up to page 42 in the book. Now we don't need this anymore. Okay. So the author says at the top of page 42, in this section you'll create a controller to handle URLs related to browsing through the music catalog. Now we haven't created the catalog yet, of course, that'll come later. It says this controller will support 3 scenarios: an index page that lists the music genres that your store carries. Clicking a genre leads to a browse page that lists all the musical albums in that particular genre. And clicking an album leads to the detail page about a specific album. So it says to create a new controller, you start by creating a new store controller class, which is what we're going to do right now. So I'm on about a third of the way down on page 42. So they tell you here to right-click on the controllers folder and select Add and Controller. So what I just did was what's shown in figure 210 on page 42. From here it says select the MVC5 controller empty. Alright, right there. And they tell us to name this store controller. That's step 3, or figure 212, that's on the middle of page 43. Boom. And what you'll see currently is in our controllers, it says does not belong to the project being debugged. Well, let's do this. Let's remove that. It probably is because I was in debug mode and didn't see that. So let's delete this. Doesn't want to let me delete that probably because that's still running. Let's go back and do that again. Right mouse click, add controller, MVC controller empty, store controller, add. Now I shouldn't get that message and I don't, and there's store controller. Alright, your new store controller, if we double click on it, as it says, it already has an index method. You'll use this to implement your listing page that lists all of the genres in your music store. You'll also add 2 additional methods to display the 2 other scenarios you want the store controller to handle, those being browse and details. These 3 methods, index, which we have right now, browse and details, which we're going to add momentarily, within your controller are known as controller actions. Their job is to respond to URL requests and perform whatever has to be performed. Then return the response back to the browser or the user that invoked it. So turning up to page 44, to get an idea how this works, it says follow these steps. Change the signature of the index method to return a string. So right now it returns an action result. We're going to change that so it returns a string. And this is going to return then, it's wrong now, so hello from store.index. Alright, and next we're supposed to basically add this again for our browse method and for our details method. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy here. Let's make it a little faster. So instead of string index right here, this will be string browse. Alright, that'll be store browse, and that'll say hello from store dot browse. I believe that's everything that goes in there. And then we'll add it one more time, and this will be details. And I'm just literally mimicking all of the actions that you see on page 44 of the book. I think I've got everything. It says accessing these URLs invokes the action methods within your controller and returns the string response, such as the one shown on the top of page 45 such as the one on the top of page 45 that's in figure 2-13. Probably a nice time to save. Okay. It says here, jumping back into our book on page 45, it says a few quick observations. Browsing to store details causes the details method of the class to be executed. Well, let's check that out. Alright, Alright, so let's run this. There were errors. And then we don't want to rebuild. Something was hosed up. I did something incorrect here. Oh, we didn't want this 3 times. We only want the public class once, but inside of this class here. So we don't need this. And we don't need that. Hopefully that cleaned everything up, so let's double check. No. He has a member called browse with the same parameter types. Okay. Browse, and one was supposed to be browse, and the other one was supposed to be details. You know me, if there's any way to do this and move it up, I'll find the way. So let's save and try to run it again. Hot dog. Alright. So I'm following the steps. The first one here says if we browse to where we are here, this will come up in a second, and we put in here at the end, we append at the end, store details, we get hello from store.details, exactly what's shown in your book in figure 2.-13 on page 45. So browsing here caused the details method of the store controller class to be executed. That's routing in action. Again, more detail later on. Though we used Visual Studio tooling to create the class, it's a very simple class. The only way that you know that it inherits from, the only way you would know from looking at it was the controller class as it inherits from the system.web.mvc.controller. Alright, you saw this, store. When we just go to store index, alright, then we just brought in details, hello from store details, and if we bring in browse, so you can see right now at least everything that we have in here seems to be working. We put text in a browser with just a controller. We didn't use a model here, we didn't use a view here. As they mentioned in the third bullet on the middle of page 45, controllers are at the heart of MVC. Every request goes through a controller, whereas some will need to make use of models and views. So just a couple more things to add, and then we've finished with this chapter. It says the previous examples have been writing out constant strings. The next step is to make this dynamic, so bring some dynamicity into this. So it says change the browse method that we have in here, and we want to change it so that instead of a string, as we have right here, we want to pass in a string with the genre. Alright? And here we're going to say string. I don't know if, I can't remember here if there's a difference between uppercase and lowercase string, but I know there is, but I don't know what it is what I'm saying. Equals HTTP utility .html encode store.browse. Let's put this on the next line here. So store.browse genre equals plus genre. Semicolon. Again, all I'm doing is putting the same, or trying to put the same code here that you see in the book that's on page, the bottom of page 45 of the book. And now, rather than returning this, we want to return the message. So in other words, we put in a parameter. Alright? That's the stuff on the bottom of page 45. Says, notice that we've been using in here HTTP utility.html encode to sanitize the input. This prevents us from injecting JavaScript or bad HTML in there. So, if we run this again, we should not get any kind of error. I don't think I've made any mistakes. possibly within two types of string, but we'll see. So it says we want to browse to store here when this comes up. And we are to say in here, oops, question mark, genre equals disco. Alright, and it said hello from store.browse, which is not what we'd want to see. Which makes me wonder, after I did all this, did I save? I may have or I may not have. I mean, I could have just goofed up right here. Wouldn't be the first time, won't be the last, as you know. So I'm going to come up here again. Only have 2 more pages left and we're done with this chapter. Store, browse, genre equals disco. Still saying hello from store.browse, so why am I not getting genre equals disco? I'm wondering if it is because I do have this, according to this, that should be a little s here. Looking to make sure I made no other mistakes. Public can't make changes while your code's running. According to this, it's got a little s here too. So, string message equals HTTP utility encode store.browse. Genre equals plus genre return message. Well, that's the only thing I can see that was different from what I had as opposed to what this program had. If it doesn't work, I'm just going to go on because I've done it before and it's worked. I've gone through this stuff that's in here before. So, store, not details, sorry. Browse, genre equals disco. Still saying hello from store.browse. For the life of me, I'm not sure why. One more thing I can think of. Come back and do file. Save all. Alright. Oh, it's because I put it in details. I didn't put it in browse. Everybody see what I did? Alright, if you're watching, I'm sure you did. So let's do this. Let's change this one to browse. So I'm going to make that one browse. And what did I make? Move that one up. Make that one details. Details. That has to be details. That has to be details. So this now is browse, browse. Okay. So I had the right code in there, but I believe it's just because I was put it in the wrong method. Okay, so let's see now. Store, browse. There you go. Okay, now we've got genre equals genre. But it's better, alright? It's not perfect yet, but it's better. Genre equals, because that should have been there. Yeah, again, I can't do that while the program's running. There we go. That should finally, file, save all. That should finally get what we want to have here. Ideally, the next one won't take as long. Store, browse, genre equals disco. Bingo. Alright. Next, we're supposed to come in and change the details method. All right. And we're supposed to have an int passed in, which represents an ID. So this time we're going to come in here and say string message equals store.details ID equals plus ID. And then we want to return message. Very similar to what we did last time, but now we're passing in a different type of parameter. Alright, an integer parameter. So file, save all. Let's run this. Very similar to what we did before. Store.details ID equal 5, the exact same thing you see in figure 215 on page 47. Alright, let me stop the run here, get back and finish up this chapter. So that's what I just showed you right there, that one and this one. And as it says, as the preceding examples indicate, you can look at controller actions as if the web browser were directly calling the methods. And it says that's a simple oversimplification, but it's stuff that we'll talk about in later chapters. Controllers offer a lot of opportunities for customization and extensibility, but you'll find that you very rarely, if ever, need to take advantage of that fact. Generally, as it says, controllers are called via a URL. Okay? So when we get to the next chapter, we're going to go into views. So this chapter, as it says, we learned about controllers, the conduit or the conductor, as they say, of an MVC application. They orchestrate the interactions of the user, the models, and the views. They respond to user input, they manipulate the appropriate model objects, they select the appropriate view to send back to the user, and here we learn the fundamentals of how controllers work in isolation from views and models. In other words, we only worked with a controller. In the next chapter, when we get to chapter 3 here, we will get into and start talking about views. Okay, so I'll be back with that one